That was the plan. Now that piece of it has been at least rescinded. But yeah, they really are still planning on cutting off funding to sterilize the instruments that they use for surgery. Because nothing's too good for our veterans, right? Or for our seniors. If you want to get disability payments through Social Security, you may need to do a hearing to establish your level of disability. Trump just cut off the funding that pays for medical experts to testify at disability hearings. After thousands of people were fired by Trump at the Social Security Administration, the Washington Post reports today, quote, delays in reviews of disability claims and hearings before administrative law judges are already starting, quote, wait times for basic phone service at Social Security. Those wait times have grown in some cases to hours. Hours-long wait times when you're calling Social Security for help right now. We're also seeing record wait times at the entrances to America's national parks, like this more than 1 mile long line outside Big Bend National Park in Texas on President's Day weekend. This happened right after Trump fired roughly 1,000 employees from the National Park Service just last month. Today, the New York Times reports that the Park Service just got in new data that actually shows some great news about last year. Last year, America's national parks had more visitors than ever before in U.S. history, which is great for last year. But they also obtained an internal Trump administration memo from this week saying they will not be publicizing this news about record attendance at America's national parks because, well, that's an awkward thing to brag about while you're firing all the people that work there because supposedly they're not needed. The National Parks Conservation Association telling the Times today, quote, the National Park Service just reported the highest visitation in its history as the administration conducts massive firings and threatens to close visitor centers and public safety facilities. America's national parks are really popular. Firing the people who work at the parks is not popular. So they're trying just not to talk about those two things in the same sentence. But none of the stuff that they're doing is popular. I mean, the Wall Street Journal now reports that Trump has an executive order that was ready to go as soon as today to shut down the U.S. Department of Education. Shutting down the U.S. Department of Education is wildly unpopular among the American people. The latest Reuters Ipsos poll asked specifically, should the U.S. close down the Department of Education? 32% said yes, 66% said no. By a more than 2-to-1 margin, Americans say, don't shut down the education department. Do Americans feel strongly about that? Yes, they do. Americans who strongly oppose shutting down the education department outnumber Americans who strongly like the idea by a 30-point margin. A lot of what they are doing is very unpopular right now. So much so that Aaron Blake at the Washington Post today nutted some of it up under the headline, the many unpopular things Trump is doing right now. And the numbers, I mean, speak for themselves. Laying off large numbers of American workers, a huge majority of the country is against that. 58% of the country is against that. Dismantling USAID, which provides foreign aid, another big majority against that. 58% against in one poll, 59% in another. How about trying to take the Panama Canal somehow? No, the American people say no to that in huge numbers. 65% opposed. Freezing funds for public health agencies? 67% opposed. Renaming the Gulf of Mexico for some reason? No, 70% of Americans oppose that. How about pardoning the January 6th defendants who attacked the Capitol for Trump? The American people are against that by an almost unimaginable margin. Numbers like this don't exist in polling. But 83% of Americans are opposed to the fact that Trump did that. And ultimately, this matters, you know? I mean, pulling genius economic moves that send the markets and other economic indicators into free fall, trying to pull off genius ideas like cutting off the funding specifically to sterilize medical instruments for when veterans get surgery, trying on all these other things that are so radically unpopular, it matters, right? It creates an inhospitable political and democratic environment for them to try to continue these things. It does enforce some political and public opinion discipline on them for trying this stuff. It's what leads to the street corner protests and the state capitol protests and the town halls that Republican members of Congress are now too scared to continue. All of these things matter. They all create democratic friction. But these things don't necessarily stop them in their tracks. What has been stopping them most directly is the courts and brave individual people in the government who have been willing to take Trump to court over what he has been doing. Today, Trump's attempt to fire the National Labor Relations Board out of existence was shut down by a federal judge in Washington, D.C., who struck down the firing of a member of that board and wrote this in the judge's ruling, quote, "The president does not have the authority to terminate members of the National Labor Relations Board at will. His attempt to fire the plaintiff from her position on the board was a blatant violation of the law. At issue in this case is the president's insistence that he has the authority to fire whomever he wants within the executive branch, overriding any congressionally mandated law in his way. The framers, anticipating such a power grab," this is the judge's ruling, "the framers, anticipating such a power grab, vested in Article 3, the judiciary, not Article 2, the executive branch under the president, the power to interpret the law, including resolving conflicts about congressional checks on presidential authority. The president's interpretation of the scope of his constitutional power, or more aptly, the judge writes, his aspiration, is, quote, flat wrong." Judge Beryl Howell writes in her ruling, quote, "An American president is not a king, not even an elected one, and his power to remove federal officers and honest civil servants like the plaintiff is not absolute. A president who touts an image of himself as a king or a dictator, perhaps as his vision of effective leadership, fundamentally misapprehends the role under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution." In addition to that ruling today, telling Trump that he cannot fire the National Labor Relations Board, Trump also lost today in federal court in Rhode Island when a judge ruled that he must restart federal funding appropriated by Congress that Trump unilaterally cut off to 22 different states. Yet another judge tonight blocked Trump from firing the head of a tiny agency that does development grants specifically in Africa, after staff members of that agency refused to allow DOJ staffers to access their offices yesterday. Those DOJ staffers came back today with some kind of security with them. We believe armed security. We are still trying to figure out who the muscle was that they brought with them. We are seeking that actively right now, trying to figure that out. But by bringing some sort of armed force with them, these kids from DOJ physically forced their way into this agency. That said, tonight, a judge blocked them from removing the head of that agency from his job. Of all of these fights, the biggest material victory thus far in all of these fights against what appear to be these illegal mass firings and these efforts to unilaterally close down and turn off parts of the government, the materially most consequential one of all of them is one that was obtained because of one man whose name is Hampton Dellinger. Trump tried to fire him in the first week in February. Mr. Dellinger fought it immediately. He fought it long enough and hard enough that while he was able to retain his post, thanks to a judge's order, still under fire from Trump, he succeeded in enlisting the Merit Systems Protection Board to reverse thousands of baseless firings of so-called probationary employees. Among the direct results of what Hampton Dellinger did are more than 5,000 people at USDA who yesterday were told they must be reinstated to their jobs. Hampton Dellinger today himself announced that he is ending his one-man fight to stay at his post at the Office of Special Counsel, which looks after whistleblower rights, which looks after the rights of government employees to not be fired for corrupt or improper reasons. He left that job today after an appeals court ruling basically made clear that he must. But take him as a case study here, because his one-man, one-month fight to not go quietly saved the jobs of thousands of people who were improperly fired by Trump. And that fight set the bar and set the tone for what it means to refuse to go quietly and to make as much good trouble as you can every single day that you can for as long as you can. Joining us now for his first interview since ending this fight is Hampton Dellinger. He's now the former head of the Office of Special Counsel. Mr. Dellinger, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry that this was your last day.
Yeah, I'd rather be at work.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your job. Tell me what your job was.
Well, for almost a year, I was the place that if you're a federal government whistleblower and you see wrongdoing happening on your job in the government, you could come to my office and report it. I could initiate an investigation. And if you happen to be retaliated against for blowing the whistle, I could help protect you.
That job, for obvious reasons, when you think about checks and balances, is an independent job. One in which Congress created the job, yes?
50 years ago.
Congress created the job and created it in such a way that the president couldn't come in and say, I don't like what this guy is doing protecting these whistleblowers, get him out, I want my own guy in there. Specifically, the design of the job, right?
That's right. And for 50 years, presidents had respected that design, had respected that there would be a limited but important role for my office and that we would have a measure of protection. So we wouldn't worry about losing our jobs when we stood up for other federal employees who are unlawfully losing their jobs.
When the president, February 7th, told you that you were fired, had you been expecting it? Did you already have a plan in place for what you would do in that moment?
Yes and no. I had seen inspectors general, really capable, hardworking IGs be ousted. I knew that there was a general view that they didn't want independent watchdogs in the executive branch, but I also knew the history of my office and that it had been around for 50 years and courts had respected that independence for 50 years. So when I got the email saying, you're fired, thank you for your service, I didn't feel like they meant it. I also didn't feel like it merited a response. So I went back and forth. And, you know, I'm someone who believes in the presidency. I want to see every American president succeed. But I also knew that my firing violated a law that had been on the books. And I just couldn't walk away in the face of that. You fought for a solid month since that happened.
Your case took one trip to the Supreme Court already, back down to lower courts. You got an adverse appeals court ruling yesterday, which led to your decision to effectively stop your fight. Did you feel like you had no choice in terms of stopping it, that there might be additional harm done to the things that you care about and that you were trying to protect if you stuck with it and kept fighting?
Certainly that was an aspect of it. I had a 3-judge panel that was somewhat conservative, and that mirrors the Supreme Court. So I knew that it could be an uphill fight, even though I disagree with the court's ruling, and I would disagree with the Supreme Court if they found my position unconstitutional. But the other issue, Rachel, is it was going to be months, maybe a year before I'd get a final answer. I'd be on the sidelines the whole time. And I've seen the damage over the past month or so that can happen in days, sometimes even hours, to these federal agencies when the laws aren't being followed. And so the idea of trying to come back in a year and fix what I think might be broken forever in terms of the independence of my agency was not something that I thought I could do.
You talk about not wanting to be on the sidelines for the duration of that kind of a fight, waiting for something to get up to and through the United States Supreme Court. What does not being on the sidelines mean? What do you plan to do now? Today's day one out of government service.
Yeah, rest maybe, but I tell you, I can't let go of yesterday. I started out in the morning and helped get 6,000 unlawfully fired federal employees their jobs back.
Yeah. And
at the end of the day, I'd lost my job. And so it was my best day at work and my worst day at work on the same day. So I'm going to hold on to that for a little bit.
Well, don't hold on to it for too long. I mean, you have seen things, the skills that got you this job in the first place and that allowed you to perform those duties for the past year, but also what you have seen about what it means to fight. It's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you tonight, because you embody an example here of what it is to stand up and put your name as the plaintiff on that suit against the government, to stand up for the way the American people ought to be treated. We very rarely ask individual human beings to say, I, the named plaintiff, am here to stand up for the people against the government that is mistreating them. And it takes something. It takes resources. You had help in filing the suit?
I did. I had brilliant lawyers who assisted me. I got a lot of support from whistleblower advocacy groups, from military veterans groups, because a lot of my job was focused on the VA, which is why, by the way, I think it makes no sense for the president to put in the secretary of the VA. I honor his military service, but he's got a big job on his own to do. And the idea that he could be in my job investigating himself is just the essence of a conflict of interest.
They dual-hatted the VA secretary and your job.
That is the plan as of a couple of weeks ago. But to your broader point, I'm just one person, and I was inspired by others. I saw the acting U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York stand up and for the rule of law and not sign off on something she didn't think was right.
Danielle Sassoon, that's
yes.
right.
I saw the inspectors general, who I'd worked with hand in hand for a year, being ousted, and I knew their integrity and their talents. And I feel like the easiest thing for me to do was just to follow the law. That's what I'd done every day in my job, and I knew my firing violated the law. So I just held true to that. I listened as I was thinking about whether to file the suit or not to Shelter in the Storm by Bob Dylan. And I just think for a lawyer, the shelter in the storm, in chaos and uncertainty, is the law. And that's just what I've tried to hold on to.
I have been not thinking about it in that poetic a term, but I have been thinking about the peculiar and insidious evil of arbitrary action, right? And when you got those 5,000 plus employees at USDA their jobs back, part of the reason you got them their jobs back is because they were fired for arbitrary reasons.
Right.
And we've seen that everywhere, right? We've seen that from, you see CDC employees get fired one day, rehired the next day, fired the next day, rehired the next day. And it's arbitrary action. They're being told it's for performance. It's clearly not. And there's something that's just dumb about that, but there's also something, I think, really insidious, because when the government behaves arbitrarily like that, it's telling you there's no refuge for you in the law, and there's no refuge for you in order. We will act, there will be no law and order for you. We'll use the law against you whenever we can, but there's no refuge for you there. There's nothing that you can turn to ask for fairness. And the arbitrary and misspelled and dumb and instantly retracted and reinstated and untrackable and anonymous nature of what they're doing, I feel like it gives it some of its authoritarian sort of cadence and feel.
Well, we only have a government because of laws. We have a president because of the Supreme Rule Book, the Constitution.
Yeah.
So everything is created and structured by a set of rules, a set of laws. And so that's what I think we have to hold on to. And many individuals are putting it front and center. Many individual judges are retaining the essence, I think, of what makes us America. But the other thing about federal employees I don't want to be lost, Rachel, is that 30% of them, more than 600,000, are military veterans.
Yes.
They wore the uniform. They put their lives on the line for our country. They come back to federal service. They're nurses, they're TSA agents, they're FBI agents. And so the least we can do is treat them with respect and treat them lawfully.
Let me ask you one last question here about the law, and it is about something that happened today. There was no cabinet meeting on the president's schedule today, but he nevertheless sort of announced after the fact that there had been a cabinet meeting, and there started to emerge some reporting about what happened. The president reportedly, or at least says now, that what he told his agency heads, his cabinet officials today, is that Elon Musk can no longer order firings, that the agencies must do it themselves, and Elon Musk is only there to advise. This obviously, it cuts against what Elon Musk has been doing. There was also a strange moment in the State of the Union where the president described Elon Musk as the head of Doge, and then immediately court filings were updated to reflect that because the government had sworn to federal courts that he wasn't the head of Doge. This overall idea of firing all the probationary employees, of Elon Musk's anonymous group coming in and ordering shutdowns of agencies and firings of whole categories of people, do you think it is running into a legal cul-de-sac? Are we getting to the point where the law is going to start to trip up these efforts in a more wholesale way?
I think the law should. I think Congress should step up. Congress has the power of the purse.
Yeah.
The president can reorganize government, but there are a set of rules that govern how that reorganization should take place. And all I was asking is that the rules be followed. And I think it's a simple truth, and I think it's one that courts will hold on to and vindicate, and I hope Congress does their part as well.
Hampton Dellinger, as of today, the former head of the Office of Special Counsel, and somebody whose story is going to be told for a very long time because of what you did and because of its effects. I know you have some wounds to lick and you need probably some rest, but don't go too far. The country needs you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.